I still remember the way the night air smelled, wet asphalt and the faint sweetness of lilacs drifting from Laura's garden. I was sitting in the living room, the TV humming low, waiting for Emily to finish brushing her teeth before bedtime. She was only 9, all giggles and questions about school the next day. Then the world exploded in red and blue. Flashing lights washed through the curtains, and before I could even rise from the couch, fists hammered at the door. Michael Harris. "Open up." Emily ran to me, eyes wide, and I told her it was fine, just a mistake, but my voice cracked in a way I couldn't hide. Laura's face appeared in the hallway, pale, her hand clutching the banister. When I opened the door, 5 officers surged inside, their radios buzzing, their boots heavy against the hardwood I'd laid down myself. They grabbed me, twisting my arms behind my back. I shouted for Emily not to watch, but she was already screaming, "Daddy!" Her small voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Laura didn't move. She didn't fight for me. She didn't even ask why. The handcuffs clicked, and suddenly I was dragged out into the cold night. Neighbors stood in the shadows, whispering. The smell of gasoline, the engine of a waiting cruiser, the rough shove against the metal door. I thought it had to be a mistake. I thought any second now Detective Alan Brooks would say, "We've got the wrong man." But he only smirked, as though he had been waiting for this moment. That was the last time I saw my daughter's face before the prison gates swallowed me. At the station, the walls smelled of bleach and sweat, and every surface seemed designed to erase dignity. They threw me into a chair under a harsh fluorescent bulb. Detective Brooks slid a folder across the table, his voice dripping with false calm. "We found the murder weapon, Michael, in your car." I laughed, an ugly, desperate laugh, because it was insane. My car? I hadn't even driven it that night. But then he pulled out photographs. A knife smeared with something dark tagged with my license plate in the background. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. "This is a mistake," I said. "You know me. You've seen me coach Little League. You've had coffee in my kitchen." Brooks leaned in, his breath sour. "Mistakes don't bleed, Michael. Someone is dead. And you're going down for it." I tried to call Laura. They let me dial once. The phone rang, and when she answered, her voice was low, broken. I begged her to come, to tell them I couldn't have done this. She whispered only 2 words before hanging up. "I'm sorry." The silence after that call was louder than the officers jeering outside the interrogation room. My chest felt hollow, like something vital had been scooped out. I thought of Emily's eyes, how she had clutched the stair railing as they dragged me away. The image branded itself into my skull, and I knew it would never leave me. When the cell door slammed that first night, I realized with a sick clarity, the truth didn't matter. Someone had decided I was guilty, and the machinery of justice was already grinding me into dust. The next morning I stood in front of the judge, shackles biting into my ankles. Judge Harold Simmons read the charges in a voice that carried no hesitation. Murder in the 1st degree. I wanted to scream, to shout that I was innocent, but every time I opened my mouth, Prosecutor Richard Coleman objected with a smug grin. I searched the courtroom for Laura. She sat in the back, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She couldn't even look at me. My best friend David Collins was there too, his arm draped over her shoulder, whispering something in her ear. My stomach twisted in ways I couldn't yet understand. "Bail is denied," Simmons declared, slamming the gavel. The sound echoed like a coffin lid closing. They led me away, past faces I thought I knew, past neighbors who avoided my eyes. The hallway smelled of paper and sweat, a courthouse perfume that clung to me long after. That night in the holding cell, lying on a thin mattress that reeked of mildew, I realized my life had shattered in less than 24 hours. I had no way to defend myself, no way to make anyone believe me. Only questions burned inside me. Why me, who set me up, and how deep the betrayal ran? But I would find out soon enough. And when I did, the truth would cut deeper than the bars surrounding me. Before the night the police tore my world apart, my life was ordinary. Simple in the kind of way people take for granted. I woke early, made coffee in the chipped blue mug Laura had bought me back in college, and read the newspaper at the kitchen table while Emily ate her cereal across from me. She'd slurped the milk too loud on purpose, just to make me laugh, her small legs swinging beneath the chair. I worked as a construction foreman. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint clung to me every evening, and though the job was rough, I loved it. There was something honest about building homes, raising walls that would shelter families. I'd come home sore, calloused but proud. Laura would be in the kitchen, her hair tied back, humming as she stirred something on the stove. She had a soft smile then, the kind that made the house feel brighter. She wasn't always easy to read, but she was the center of my world. David Collins, my best friend since high school, was always around. He was the funny one, the guy who'd light up a barbecue with bad jokes and too much beer. We'd worked on some of the same job sites, played poker on Friday nights. I trusted him more than anyone. At least I thought I did. I look back now and wonder if there were signs, shadows behind the laughter. But back then, my world felt solid. My family was intact. My future was something I could hold, and then it was gone. I can still see one particular Saturday like it's carved into my memory. Emily was playing soccer at the local park. The sun was high. Kids' voices filled the air, and I stood at the sidelines with David, cheering so loud she covered her face in embarrassment. Laura was beside me, arms crossed, but smiling in that quiet way of hers. "Michael, you're gonna scare her off the field," David laughed, clapping me on the back. But Emily scored a goal anyway, running straight into my arms afterward, sweaty and breathless. "Did you see, Dad? Did you see?" Moments like that were everything. The grass under my shoes, the whistle of the referee, the smell of hot dogs from the concession stand. It all seemed so small, so ordinary. But now, sitting here remembering, those details are gold to me. That evening we had friends over for a cookout. David flipped burgers. Laura poured sweet tea, and the sound of laughter drifted into the night. Neighbors waved from their porches. Emily danced barefoot on the lawn, fireflies flickering around her like tiny lanterns. I thought to myself, this is it. This is happiness, a life built from small joys and simple love. I didn't know those were the last pure memories I'd ever hold. The truth is, when prison swallowed me, it wasn't just my freedom that was stolen. It was this ordinary rhythm of life that people never think twice about. The clink of silverware at dinner, the way Emily's voice cracked when she sang along to the radio, the quiet comfort of lying beside Laura, listening to the ceiling fan spin as we drifted off to sleep. I remember one night in particular, just days before the arrest. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch with her head in my lap. I stroked her hair while Laura folded laundry, and the news droned in the background. David stopped by with a six-pack, laughing about something at work. It was all so normal, so safe. If I'd known it was about to end, maybe I would have held them tighter. Maybe I would have looked longer at Laura's eyes, tried to read what she wasn't saying. Maybe I would have noticed the way David's smile lingered a second too long. But I didn't, and so the life I loved, this life of grass stains and bedtime stories, of Sunday dinners and neighborhood laughter, was stripped away in an instant. The contrast is unbearable, because when I close my eyes in that cell, it isn't the crime scene photos I see. It's Emily running barefoot through the grass, laughing. And knowing that version of my life will never return is its own kind of prison. The crime that ended my life wasn't just murder, it was betrayal carved into my very skin. The victim was a man named Thomas Reed, a local shop owner I barely knew. I'd bought nails and lumber from him once or twice, nothing more. Yet on the night he was killed, my name became tangled in his death like barbed wire. Detective Brooks laid it all out with a rehearsed calm. Thomas Reed was found stabbed behind his hardware store. A witness claimed to have seen me near the alley. My fingerprints, so they said, were on the knife. And, worst of all, the weapon itself was discovered under the driver's seat of my car. But I hadn't been anywhere near that alley. That night I was at home with Laura and Emily, watching a rerun of Wheel of Fortune. The memory of Emily trying to shout answers louder than the TV was burned into my mind. But no one wanted to hear it. Then came the moment that hollowed me out. Sitting across from Brooks, trying to piece together how my life was being twisted into something unrecognizable, the door opened. David walked in. My best friend, my brother in all but blood. Relief washed over me for a split second, until I saw the way he avoided my eyes. "Mr. Collins, please tell us what you witnessed," Brooks said. David cleared his throat, looked at his folded hands, and then said the words that sealed my fate. "I saw Michael near the store that night. He looked upset, like something was wrong." My stomach dropped. My vision tunneled. I shouted, "David, what the hell are you doing?" But he kept staring at the table, his voice calm, rehearsed. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a mistake. This was a setup. And the man I trusted most was the one tightening the noose. The news spread like wildfire. Local father arrested for brutal stabbing. My name splashed across the papers, my face flickering on the evening news. Neighbors who once waved at me now crossed the street. Men I'd worked alongside for years stopped returning my calls. Laura wouldn't speak to me. I tried, God knows I tried. From the holding cell I wrote her letters, begging her to come, to believe me, to remember that night on the couch with Emily. But her responses, when they came at all, were short, cold. She's confused, she wrote once. Emily asks questions I can't answer. Confused? No, Laura, she wasn't the one confused, you were. Someone had planted this lie and you were already letting it grow. Then I heard whispers in the hallways of the courthouse. David had been seen visiting Laura while I was locked away. People murmured about how close they seemed, how comfortable. At first I refused to believe it. But then one day during a recess, I saw it with my own eyes. David's hand brushing against hers, lingering, and Laura not pulling away. The betrayal wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in my home, in the very walls of my marriage. When the prosecution laid out their case, it was like watching a theater play where every actor already knew the ending. Coleman, the prosecutor, leaned heavily on David's testimony. He painted me as a jealous, unstable man, desperate and violent. Even his closest friend, Coleman thundered, saw him near the crime scene that night. I wanted to leap from my seat, to shout the truth so loud the jury couldn't ignore it. But every time I spoke, Simmons slammed his gavel, silencing me. The knife was paraded in front of the jury like a cursed relic. The bloodstains gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Brooks described finding it under my seat, his voice steady, rehearsed. No mention of how many people had access to my car. No mention of David borrowing it just days before. I looked at Laura in the gallery, praying for her eyes to meet mine, for her to stand up and say, "No, he was home with me, I swear it." But she never did. She just sat frozen, her face unreadable, as though she'd already chosen not to believe me. The gavel came down again and again. And each strike wasn't just the sound of a courtroom in order. It was the sound of my life being buried under lies. By the end of that week, I wasn't just accused. I was condemned in the eyes of everyone who had once known me, and worst of all, I still didn't know why David had done it. The trial began in the grand, echoing courtroom of Monroe County, a place I had once walked past without a thought. Now every creak of its wooden benches and every whisper from the gallery was a dagger pressed against my ribs. The ceiling fan spun lazily, doing nothing to push away the heat that clung to my skin. Prosecutor Richard Coleman stood tall in his crisp suit, his voice sharp and deliberate, slicing me apart piece by piece. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, pointing at me as though I was some beast in a cage, "you will see that Michael Harris is not the hard-working father he pretends to be. You will see anger, jealousy, and violence boiling beneath his mask of respectability." His words poured poison into the room. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, already leaning toward his version of me. He showed photographs of Thomas Reed's body, the alley where he had fallen, the knife smeared with blood. Each image was held high like proof carved in stone, and then he called David to the stand. My best friend, my betrayer. David's voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. He said I'd been acting strangely in the weeks before the murder. He claimed I'd confided in him about debts, about anger with Reed over a business deal gone wrong, lies, all lies. But the jury nodded, soaking up every word. I wanted to scream across the courtroom, "Tell them the truth, David. Tell them what you've done." But my lawyer, Paul Jenkins, placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't, you'll make it worse." Worse? My life was already burning. Paul Jenkins, my so-called defense attorney, he was a tired man with sagging eyes and an overstuffed briefcase, the kind of lawyer appointed when no one else will take the case. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. When Coleman twisted my words, Paul sat silent. When witnesses contradicted themselves, Paul barely raised an objection. I begged him, whispering through clenched teeth, "Ask Laura to testify. She knows I was home." He shook his head, muttering, "Her statement won't hold up. The jury won't buy it." Won't buy it? She was my wife. She was the mother of my child. But Laura never took the stand. She sat in the gallery, her face pale, her hands folded, never once looking at me. Every time I searched her eyes, she turned away, as if ashamed of something deeper than doubt. Then came the so-called evidence, a bloody shirt pulled from my trash can. But it wasn't mine. The size was wrong. The brand nothing I'd ever worn. I said it over and over, but Coleman spun it into a story of guilt. How I had tried to dispose of evidence in haste. The jurors stared at the shirt, their faces hardening. They didn't hear me. They didn't care it was a play and I was cast as the villain. The ending had already been written long before the curtain rose. The trial stretched for weeks, but for me, it was one endless day of humiliation. Each morning, shackles on my wrists, I was led past reporters shouting questions I couldn't answer. Did you kill him, Michael? Why'd you do it? Their cameras flashed, their pens scribbled, and every headline already screamed my guilt. Judge Simmons presided with cold detachment, barely looking at me as if I were beneath notice. Every objection from Jenkins was overruled. Every flourish from Coleman was indulged. It was never a balance of justice. It was a stage tilted against me. I watched the jury carefully. A retired teacher, a factory worker, a young mother. Ordinary people who might have been my neighbors, who might have once shared a beer at my grill. But their eyes were guarded, distant. They weren't seeing Michael Harris, the father, the husband, the friend. They were seeing Michael Harris, the accused murderer, and still through it all my gaze drifted to Laura. Sometimes I caught her whispering to David in the hallway. Sometimes I saw her avoiding my eyes altogether. The more I looked, the more I realized she wasn't here to fight for me. She was already slipping into his shadow. The trial wasn't about truth. It was about power, image and lies told loudly enough to be believed. When the jury was dismissed for deliberation, I sat in silence, my heart pounding like a drum in a funeral march. I knew what was coming, and yet knowing didn't make the blow any softer when it landed. The bus that carried me to prison rattled like an iron coffin on wheels. Chains bit into my wrists and ankles, each jolt of the road sending pain through my bones. Through the barred windows, I watched the world blur past, trees, highways, glimpses of freedom I would never touch again. When the gates of Monroe State Penitentiary rose before me, black and jagged against the sky, my stomach turned to stone. The first thing that hit me when the doors opened was the smell. Sweat, bleach, and something sour like old metal mixed with rot. The air itself seemed poisonous, heavy with despair. Guards barked orders, their boots echoing on the concrete floors. We were stripped, searched, and issued uniforms that smelled of mildew and fear. My cell was a cage barely big enough for a bed and a toilet. The mattress sagged in the middle, its stuffing spilling out like old wounds. My cellmate, a wiry man with tattoos crawling up his neck, eyed me like fresh prey. "New fish," he muttered, his grin sharp as a knife. That first night I lay awake, every sound amplified, the clang of bars, the distant shouts, the rattle of keys. Somewhere down the hall a man screamed, his voice cut short by the thud of fists. I clutched the thin blanket around me, whispering Emily's name into the dark, as if her memory could shield me. But prison doesn't care about memories. It only teaches you how to survive or how to break. The days bled into each other. Morning roll call, tasteless food trays, hours in the yard where eyes followed me like predators in the tall grass. The guards treated us like cattle, shoving us into lines, shouting commands. Officer Bradley Turner was the worst. Thick arms, cruel smile, always looking for an excuse to remind us we were nothing. One morning, he slammed his baton against the bars of my cell. "On your feet, Harris. Time to earn your keep." They marched me to the laundry room where steam hung thick in the air and the machines rattled endlessly. The work was brutal, my hands raw by midday. But worse than the labor was the silence. No laughter, no conversation, just the hiss of steam and the knowledge that no one here cared if I lived or died. I learned quickly to keep my head down. But even silence doesn't save you. In the yard, a group cornered me, testing the new guy. Fists flew. My ribs ached for weeks after, and when I begged for medical help, Turner just laughed. "Get used to it, Harris. This is your world now." That night, a voice from the cell next to mine whispered through the wall. "Name's Samuel Dawson. Call me Red. You want to live in here, you'll need a friend." His words were a lifeline in the darkness. For the first time, I felt less alone, but survival was still a daily gamble, and every day I woke wondering if it would be my last. Letters from the outside kept me breathing. At first, Laura wrote, short notes about bills, about Emily's school, about how things were complicated. I clung to those scraps of her handwriting, the faint trace of her perfume on the paper. Emily's letters were different, full of love, full of questions. When are you coming home, Daddy? Can you come to my game? I answered each one with trembling hands, promising things I couldn't deliver. Promising I would be back. But as months turned into years, the letters slowed. Laura's words grew colder, more distant. Emily's handwriting changed, childish loops replaced by careful, practiced lines. The last letter I received from her ended with, "Mom says you're sick." I don't understand. Sick. That's what Laura told her. That's how she explained my absence. Every night, lying on that thin mattress, I imagined my daughter growing up without me. I imagined another man sitting at my table, eating my food, tucking her into bed. And though I didn't yet know the full extent of it, deep in my bones, I felt it. The betrayal wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The first few years in prison carved pieces out of me, but nothing compared to the day the letters stopped coming. At first I told myself it was just the mail, slow, unreliable. I paced my cell like a caged animal, waiting for Officer Turner to slide the envelopes under the bars. But week after week my name was never called. Finally, after months of silence, a guard handed me a letter. My heart leapt. It was from Laura. The envelope was thin, the handwriting sharper than I remembered. I tore it open with shaking hands. "Michael, I can't do this anymore. I've tried. I've waited. Emily needs stability. I need stability. This life, it's not what I can bear. I've made a choice. Please don't hate me, that was it. No, I love you. No, we'll figure this out." Just cold finality written in ink. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I pressed the paper to my face, desperate to smell her perfume again, but there was nothing. Just the faint scent of paper and despair. I wrote back, begging her to reconsider, begging her to remember the man she'd once loved. I sent letter after letter, but none came back. Silence became her answer. And then one afternoon, Red slid onto the bench beside me in the yard, his voice low. "You ought to sit down for this, brother. Word around is, Laura, she remarried." The world tilted beneath me. My throat went dry. "Who?" I croaked. His eyes softened, but the words came out hard. "David Collins. The man who framed me now wore my ring, sat at my table, tucked my daughter into bed." When the news sank in, I raged like a man possessed. I slammed my fists against the concrete wall of my cell until my knuckles split. Blood smeared across the grey stone, a mirror of the storm inside me. At night, I lay awake imagining it. David sitting in my chair at the dinner table, his hand on Laura's, Emily calling him Dad. The thought clawed at my chest until it felt like my ribs would snap. I replayed every memory of David in my mind, our poker nights, the cookouts, the way he'd held Emily on his shoulders at the park. All of it twisted now, tainted with poison. Had he been planning this all along? Was every smile a mask, every laugh a lie? I wrote to Laura, demanding the truth. Weeks later, I received a single letter. It was short, almost cruel. "Michael, please stop writing. David has been here for Emily. She loves him. He's been good to us. I've moved on. You need to let go. Let go. How do you let go of the life stolen from you? How do you let go of your daughter's childhood, of your wife's vows, of your very identity?" I crumpled the letter in my fist, but I couldn't throw it away. So I tucked it under my mattress, where I kept every scrap of her words, even the ones that broke me. Because no matter how much I hated her choices, a part of me still clung to the memory of who we had been. But that memory was dying. The worst came the day Emily stopped calling me Dad. It was during one of the rare phone calls allowed, her voice tinny and distant through the prison receiver. "Hi, Michael," she said. "Not Dad, not Daddy, just Michael." I froze. My throat closed. "Emily, sweetheart, it's me. It's Dad." There was silence, then a sigh. "Mom says I shouldn't call you that anymore. It's confusing." David's here now." Her voice cracked on his name, and I prayed it meant she hated saying it. But then she added softly, "He takes me to school. He comes to my games. He helps me with homework." The words stabbed deeper than any knife. My little girl was being raised to believe her father was gone, replaced by the very man who destroyed me. When the line went dead, I pressed the receiver against my forehead. my tears blurring the scratched glass of the booth. Around me, inmates shouted and cursed. Guards barked orders, but all I heard was her voice calling another man Dad. That night, I whispered her name into the dark until my throat was raw. Emily, Emily, Emily. But the truth echoed louder than my whispers. I had lost her. Time inside prison doesn't pass like it does in the free world. Out there, people measure life in birthdays, holidays, the changing of seasons. In here, it's the clang of bars, the shuffle of chains, the endless turning of keys. Days bleed into nights and nights into years, until you can't tell one from another. The first decade broke me slowly. Letters dwindled until they vanished altogether. Phone calls stopped. The pictures of Emily I kept taped to my wall grew old, her smiling face frozen at 12 years old. While I aged inside a cage, friends I had worked with, neighbors who once called me brother, they all disappeared. No visits, no cards. My name became a ghost outside those prison walls, even Laura, even David. They stopped writing. At first it was rage that filled me, rage at their betrayal. But as the years stretched on, the rage dulled into something worse, silence. A suffocating silence that pressed down until I wondered if I still existed to anyone at all. One day, Red leaned through the bars of his cell and said, "Out there, they've buried you, brother. You're dead to them." And he was right. I was buried alive. The second decade came with a different kind of death. The people who remembered me began to vanish. I got a letter from my sister, Margaret, telling me our mother had passed. I wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. Instead, I sat in my cell that night listening to the distant hum of fluorescent lights, imagining her coffin lowering into the ground without me there to say goodbye. Years later, I heard Margaret herself had died. No letter this time, just a guard passing the news with a shrug. "Your sister's gone." That was it. No details, no comfort, just another piece of my life stolen in a sentence. Even Red, my anchor in that hellhole, grew frail. His cough worsened, his hands shook, and one winter morning they carried his body out of the cell block under a sheet. I pressed my forehead to the cold bars, whispering goodbye to the only man who'd truly seen me in there. Every loss was a nail in my coffin. Not the kind buried 6 feet under, but the kind where you stay alive to feel each hammer blow. By then I stopped counting the years. Counting meant hope, and hope was dangerous. The world outside kept moving, but for me it was frozen. I saw it only through newspapers left behind in the common room. Presidents came and went. Wars started and ended. Phones got smaller, then smarter. The faces in the papers were strangers. The music on the radio alien. I was forgotten, erased. Even my own reflection felt like a stranger. Hair gone grey, lines etched deep across my face, eyes hollow. I would stare into the cracked metal mirror above the sink and ask myself, "Who are you now, Michael?" Sometimes, in the silence of the night, I wondered if maybe the world was right to forget me. Maybe I had become nothing but a story, a cautionary tale whispered once and then abandoned. But deep inside, a small ember refused to die. Even buried, even forgotten, something in me whispered that the truth would surface one day. That someone somewhere would dig up the evidence that could set me free. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But in the darkest silence, even a whisper of hope is louder than the grave. I had long stopped believing anyone would ever say my name again, without spitting it like poison. So when the guard told me I had a visitor, I almost laughed. Who would come for me now? In the visitation room, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, she appeared, young, sharp-eyed, with a stack of folders clutched against her chest. She introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, a lawyer with an Innocence project. Her voice carried conviction, not pity. "Mr. Harris," she said, sliding into the chair across from me, "I've been looking into your case, and I believe there's something that was overlooked." I studied her, waiting for the disappointment I knew would come. I'd seen lawyers before, court-appointed, half asleep, more interested in closing files than opening them. But Sarah's eyes burned with a fire I hadn't seen in decades. She pulled a folder from her stack and opened it with a deliberate snap. Inside were yellowed papers, photocopies, faded photographs. Back in the original trial, a blood sample was taken from the crime scene. It was tested for type, not for DNA, because the technology wasn't widely used then. But the sample was preserved, forgotten in storage. My heart thudded in my chest. Forgotten in storage, she leaned forward. "If we can get that DNA tested now, It could prove what you've been saying all along, that you weren't there. That you didn't kill Thomas Reed. For the first time in decades, the bars around me seemed thinner, weaker, as though her words were prying them apart. The days after Sarah's visit were different. The prison was still a tomb. The food still tasteless. The nights still filled with shouts and groans. But inside me something shifted. Hope, fragile as a candle flame, flickered back to life. I replayed her words over and over. The sample was preserved. I saw her again weeks later. She came with papers to sign, motions she had filed, letters she had sent. Each step was a battle. The prosecutor's office stonewalled her, claiming the evidence was lost, misplaced, irrelevant. But Sarah fought like a woman possessed. One afternoon she spread documents across the visitation table, her pen tapping furiously. "They don't want to admit they buried you alive, Michael. They'd rather let you rot than face their mistake. But I won't stop. We'll drag this evidence into the light if we have to pry it out of their hands." I wanted to believe her, but fear gnawed at me. I'd learned in here that hope was dangerous. Hope could break you worse than despair. Still, when she looked me in the eyes and said, "You are not forgotten," I almost wept. That night in my cell, I whispered those words into the darkness like a prayer. "You are not forgotten." Months passed, filled with delays, excuses, hearings that went nowhere. I felt the hope slipping through my fingers, like sand I couldn't hold. But then, one morning, Turner came to my cell, tossing an envelope at me. "Legal mail," he grunted. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside was Sarah's letter, short and urgent. "The DNA results are in." "It's not yours." It never was. "I'll be there soon." I sat on the edge of my cot, the letter trembling in my hands. The world seemed to tilt. After decades of silence, of being erased, of being buried alive, finally there was proof. Proof that I had been telling the truth all along. Tears burned my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering Emily's name. For the first time in over 30 years, freedom no longer felt like a dream. It felt possible, and yet deep down, a shadow lingered. Because I knew the fight wasn't over. Proof wasn't enough. The same system that buried me could just as easily ignore me again. But now at least I had a weapon. And I had Sarah. Sarah came back with the DNA results clutched in her hands like a weapon. We sat across from each other in the visitation room, the buzzing lights above us making everything feel sharper, more dangerous. "It's not yours, Michael. The blood at the crime scene doesn't match you. It proves you didn't kill Thomas Reed." Her voice trembled, not from doubt but from fury. "This should be enough to free you. Should be." 2 words that carried the weight of a lifetime. The next hearing was the first time I'd stood in a courtroom in decades. Shackles still bound my ankles, but this time I held something stronger than silence. I held the truth. Sarah presented the evidence with fire in her voice, her words slicing through the air like blades. But the prosecutor's office fought back like cornered wolves. Coleman was long retired, but his shadow lingered. His successor argued that the DNA didn't rule me out entirely, that I could have had an accomplice. Lies stacked on lies, even in the face of hard science. Judge Simmons, older now, frailer but no less cold, leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with disdain. "This court is not in the business of rewriting history lightly," he said. His words dripped with arrogance, as if admitting the truth would unravel the fabric of justice itself. I stood there, fists clenched, wanting to shout. But I had learned my lesson long ago. This system wasn't built to hear me. It was built to bury me. Sarah refused to be silenced. She filed motions, petitions, appeals. Every document was a brick she hurled against the walls of the prison that held me. But the resistance was brutal. Files mysteriously went missing. Hearings were delayed for months at a time. Evidence was misplaced. One day, Sarah slammed her briefcase onto the visitation table, her face pale with anger. "They're stalling, Michael. They know the DNA clears you, but admitting it would expose decades of corruption. They'd rather let an innocent man rot than face the shame." Her fire lit something in me that had been dead for years. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting again. But the fight carried a cruel twist of the knife. In the newspapers that Sarah sometimes brought me, I saw photographs of David Collins, my betrayer, my executioner. He stood smiling in front of the house that used to be mine, his arm around Laura, Emily beside them. My daughter, grown now in a graduation gown, smiling beside the man who had destroyed me. The world believed his lie so completely that he had built an entire life on it. And the thought burned hotter than any cell could contain. The final hearing dragged on for hours. Sarah's voice rose with conviction as she laid out the facts. The preserved DNA, the inconsistencies in the testimonies, the evidence that pointed everywhere but to me. The state's attorney sneered, clinging to crumbling arguments. Even if this DNA doesn't belong to Mr. Harris, it does not exonerate him completely. Circumstantial evidence still places him at the scene. I wanted to laugh, bitter, hollow laughter. Circumstantial evidence had stolen my life. Now even hard science was being twisted to keep me buried, but Sarah wouldn't let them win. She stood tall, her voice unwavering. How many more years must this man lose before the truth is enough? The evidence is clear. Michael Harris is innocent. Keeping him here isn't justice, it's cruelty. For a moment, silence filled the courtroom. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Judge Simmons leaned forward, his gavel resting in his frail hand. "This court will render its decision in due time," he said. And with that he struck the gavel once, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. I was led away in chains, my fate still dangling in the air, but this time I wasn't just a man condemned. I was a man armed with truth, and that truth would not stay buried forever. The morning they called my name, I thought it was another cruel mistake. Officer Turner rattled the bars with his baton, his usual smirk replaced with something unreadable. "Pack up, Harris. Court wants you." I shuffled into the transport van, wrists bound, heart pounding. Another hearing, I told myself. Another excuse to dangle hope in front of me before snatching it away. But when we pulled up to the courthouse, something felt different. Sarah was waiting in the hallway, her eyes shining not with anger this time, but with something fiercer, triumph. Inside the courtroom, Judge Simmons looked smaller than I remembered, his robe hanging loose on his shoulders. His voice cracked as he read the ruling. Newly tested DNA evidence excludes Michael Harris as the perpetrator. The conviction is vacated. Mr. Harris is hereby released. For a moment the words didn't register. Released, vacated, free. The air rushed out of my lungs and the room tilted. I gripped the defense table to keep from collapsing. Sarah placed a trembling hand on my arm. "You're going home, Michael." Home, the word felt foreign, almost cruel. Where was home now? My wife was gone. My daughter was a stranger. My house belonged to another man. Still, when the gavel came down, the chains around my wrists were removed. For the first time in 32 years, I touched my skin without steel biting into it. I should have felt joy, but all I felt was hollow. The gates opened and the world blinded me. The sky seemed impossibly wide, the air sharp and clean after decades of rot. Cars rushed past faster than I remembered, their designs sleek, alien. Billboards flashed with colors I didn't recognize, selling gadgets I didn't understand. I stood there with a plastic bag of belongings from 1989, a broken watch, a faded wallet, a photograph of Emily as a child. Relics from a life that had long since turned to dust. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in my face. "Michael, how does it feel to be free? What will you do now? Do you want to sue the state?" Their voices were knives. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them I wasn't free, not really. That freedom given back after being stolen for half a lifetime isn't freedom at all. It's a sentence of another kind. Sarah pulled me away, shielding me as best she could. We walked to her car, and for the first time in decades I sat in a passenger seat without shackles. The leather felt strange beneath my palms. The city outside the window was unrecognizable, skyscrapers taller, streets louder. People moving faster than my mind could process. I whispered to myself, I don't belong here, because the truth was undeniable. I had been freed into a world that had no place for me. That night, Sarah put me up in a motel. The room smelled of detergent and stale air conditioning. The bed was soft, too soft. After years of thin mattresses, it felt like sinking into quicksand. I sat on the edge, staring at the glowing screen of the television. News anchors spoke of politics, wars, celebrities I had never heard of. The world had sprinted forward while I was left behind in chains. I opened my wallet and pulled out the only photo I had of Emily, 9 years old, missing a front tooth, grinning wide. But the child in that picture no longer existed. Somewhere out there she was a grown woman, and I was nothing more than a ghost from her past. I pressed the photo to my lips, whispering, "I'm out, baby girl. I'm out." But freedom didn't taste like victory. It tasted like ashes. Because even though the walls no longer surrounded me, I carried the prison inside my chest, and tomorrow I would face the hardest part, not the guards, not the courts, not the endless nights of despair. Tomorrow I would face my family, the family that no longer belonged to me. The first time I saw Emily again, my heart nearly gave out. Sarah had arranged the meeting at a small cafe on the edge of town. My hand shook as I walked through the door, the bell above it jingling like a cruel echo from a life long gone. And there she was, not the little girl with braids and grass stains on her knees. Not the child who clung to my neck after soccer games. She was a grown woman now, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp and guarded. She looked like Laura, too much like Laura. "Emily," I whispered, my throat dry. She looked at me for a long moment before nodding politely. "Michael, Michael." Not Dad, not Daddy. Just my name spoken like it belonged to someone else. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "You've grown so much. I missed everything. Your birthdays, your graduation." My voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." She shifted in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I don't really remember you. I mean, I remember stories." "But Mom said—" She stopped, glancing toward the door, and then I saw him, David. He walked in like he owned the place, his arm around Laura. They froze when they saw me, but not in shame. In control, in possession. My family, my wife, my daughter stood beside the man who destroyed me. And I realized then this wasn't a reunion. It was a confrontation I could never win. Laura's eyes flickered when they met mine. Not love, not even guilt. Just a cold recognition, as though I were a relic she had locked away and hoped never to see again. "Michael," she said softly, almost rehearsed. "It's been a long time." I clenched my fists under the table. "A lifetime." David stepped forward, his voice slick with confidence. "You shouldn't be here, Mike. You need to move on." For everyone's sake. Rage burned in me hotter than it ever had behind bars. I wanted to leap across the table, to grab him by the throat, to demand he confess. But Emily was watching. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, caught between two versions of truth. "Emily," I said, desperate, "I am your father. I never hurt anyone." I was framed by him. I pointed at David, my hand trembling. Her face tightened, confusion battling with disbelief. "All my life," she said slowly, "Mom told me you were guilty, that you were dangerous," her voice cracked. "And David was there. He raised me. He never let me down." The words cut deeper than any cell door ever had. She believed him. She believed them. Laura reached for Emily's hand. "Let's go," she whispered, and just like that they turned away. I stumbled out of the cafe, the air sharp in my lungs, my vision swimming. The sound of their footsteps fading behind me was worse than any prison silence. 32 years I had clung to hope, whispering Emily's name in the dark. 32 years I had dreamed of holding her again. And when the moment came, I was nothing but a stranger. Sarah found me sitting on the curb outside, my head in my hands. She touched my shoulder gently. "Michael, I'm so sorry." I looked up at her, my voice broken. "Faye stole everything. My freedom, my wife, my daughter. He stole my whole damn life, and I got nothing back. The city moved around us, cars honking, people laughing. The world alive and unaware of the dead man sitting on the sidewalk. I whispered, more to myself than to her, I was freed too late. Because the truth was clear now. Freedom hadn't given me back my family. It hadn't given me back the years. It had only delivered me to the graveyard of everything I had lost. And no matter how hard I fought, some things could never be restored. Nights are the hardest now. The silence outside these motel walls is not the same as prison silence. It's bigger, emptier, filled with ghosts. I lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what my life might have been if that knock on the door had never come. Emily would have grown up with me at her games, at her graduations, at her wedding someday. Laura and I might have grown old together, sitting on the porch watching fireflies. I might have had grandchildren calling me Grandpa, but instead I had concrete walls and bars, a number instead of a name, decades that turned me from a father into a shadow. And when I walked out, it wasn't to find my family waiting with open arms. It was to find them already gone, their lives rewritten without me. The world calls me exonerated, but that word feels hollow. I am not restored. I am not healed. I am only free in the most technical sense. My sentence continues, only now I serve it outside the gates. Sometimes I walk the streets and see fathers holding their daughters' hands, and it guts me. I hear laughter in a park, and I feel both joy and grief. Joy that life continues, grief that mine was stolen. People tell me to sue, to fight for compensation. Maybe I will. But no check can buy back a childhood missed, a marriage betrayed, a life stolen. Money can't erase the image of Emily calling another man dad. I see David Collins sometimes in photographs online, smiling, grey at the temples now, but still living in the house I built with my own hands, still sleeping beside the woman who once wore my ring, still called dad by the daughter who is my blood, and that is a wound no court can heal. Sarah tells me my story matters, that speaking out could help others, could shine light on the rot in the system. Maybe she's right. Maybe my suffering can at least serve as a warning. But when I'm alone, all I feel is the emptiness. So I tell my story now, not for revenge, not because I expect healing, but because silence is a prison too. I speak because somewhere out there, another man might be sitting in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. And if my voice reaches him, if it keeps him holding on one more day, then maybe these wasted years won't be wasted entirely. Freedom came too late for me. My wife is gone. My daughter is lost. My youth was buried in a concrete tomb, but my voice, my truth, that is mine again. And I will not let it be taken from me. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.